Hello everyone, my name is David of David B Media, and today we are going to be looking at highlight management. So today we're going to be going over a series of photos I have taken recently. We're going to be editing through these in Lightroom, looking at how they were shot in camera and what we were doing to those photos in Lightroom in order to have great exposures from photos that were taken with really bright highlights. So I'm going to start a screen recording here, and we will jump in. So I have 11 photos here we're going to look at, and all 11 of these photos are kindly different in terms of colors, compositions, subjects, backgrounds. However, they all share something in common. All of these photos share very bright highlights, particularly in our skies, with one exception here. So as we look across the board here, all of these photos are going to have been taken in a very bright and sunny environment and are all going to have some form of hazy or slightly blown out background. Now, the reason that all of these photos are going to edit very nicely and turn out looking so well is because they were shot at a very particular way in camera. When we're looking at how this photo was exposed, right here, number 10, for example. This is a photo I took somewhat recently at a little mountain adventure in Colorado. Myself, the tree here, and a lot of the shoreline is kindly underexposed. However, right over this mountain peak, we have these really bright, overcast skies. I think it was entirely cloudy with the rain coming in. So we have some weird things going on. But the reason this photo was exposed like it is because these highlights are right at 98% brightness. So this is a highlight that is almost blown out that I use zebras on my camera for to show when that highlight is almost at 100% brightness. And I know that when I set those highlights to that amount, I will end up getting an image that I have a lot of tonal range with, so we can really stretch out those highlights exactly where we want them, but also bring up those shadows and midtones if we need. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start editing this image here. And one of the things that I typically like to do is start off by bringing up the shadows. Because I often shoot kindly underexposed for my subject, so many city noises, because my subject is often underexposed in order to save highlights, especially in some type of important setting, like this lovely wedding I shot recently. Two things that make this image hard are your contrast between the black and the white. Two colors or tonal ranges, per se, that the camera does not do well is black and white. Because black and white are, technically speaking, not a color. They are a luminance value and offer a certain amount of reflectivity. So our black suit here is going to have a very low reflectivity, whereas this white dress, very high reflectivity, lots of bright highlights. So within this image, I have a couple things that are underexposed that will expose very nicely because we're exposing for the brightest parts of our image to save everything else later. So I'm going to come back into this image, and I'm just going to start off by bumping those shadows up here. So I'll bring those up to 60. Somewhere around 60, 65 is generally the highest I like to go. Otherwise, you'll start to get a weird hazy filmy look. I don't quite know if that's the proper white balance here. Doesn't have to be too specific, not overly important. When it comes to our tone curve, I am more often than not putting a medium contrast tone curve on to start with and give me kind of some base corrections, adjust my tones from there if I need to. It looks like some of my mid-tones might be a little low. You might want to bring those up just a bit. And we're still working with a very acceptable range of highlights here coming over our mountain peak. We come down into our detail panel. when you are bringing up the exposure in your image, either with your tone curve, your highlights, shadows, exposure, however you do it, when we are adding this artificial exposure post, after we have taken the image in camera, oftentimes we can find some noise in the image. So what I like to do is find something that's in focus, and then often if you have a solid background like this mountain or this sky behind it, you can really tell when the amount is just right. So when we come to our manual noise reduction panel, we can click on the luminance and start to drag this slider over to the right. And as we do so, we'll really start to get a soft image. And if we bring it all the way, oftentimes it's going to be too soft. For faces here, I don't particularly love that look. However, we are going to get that probably somewhere around 50, 40-ish, and that looks very good. So now we have taken an image that was previously underexposed, did not have much color or contrast to it, and we have brought that exposure up to where we needed it to be while we are saving all of those bright highlights in the image here. Now, because all of these images are similar, I'm going to hit Command A. Before we sync them, I'll add a lens correction, and then I will sync all of these photos together. I didn't do any healing or crop, so technically that doesn't matter, but I'll sync all of these together to give me that same tone curve and shadow correction. So I'm going to come back to this image here. This is an image where we really need to get this right in camera. Shooting a wedding like this, it can feel high pressure. However, if you know how to use your camera, you know your equipment, you know your exposures, it's not a problem at all. So I'm actually going to reset this one real quick. We're just going to look at the base image. Again, our background, our sky, our groom here on the right are all kindly underexposed. However, the dress is just walking that fine line between nice exposure and blown out highlights, which is exactly where we want it to be. So again, going to start off bringing those shadows up. Usually 60, 65 again is kind of my limit. I think anything past that, you start to introduce some weird looks into your image. We'll adjust those highlights just a little bit, and I'm going to slightly overexpose them for 1 second because I know my next step is coming back to that tone curve, hitting our medium contrast, which is going to bring those highlights right here down just a little bit. And then I can kind of mess around with where I want those to fall. So we have just gone from a underexposed image with nice but kindly off highlights to something that is very nicely exposed and has a very fast aperture background, 3.5, shooting at 113 millimeters. So a lot of lens compression there, but keeping a very nice look. Obviously, we could finish our color grading, go in and kind of spot correct some of these dust particles here, but that's how we're going to manage those highlights. I'm going to come to this photo right here, which is a self photo on the tripod. Similar thing, we've got a raw image going back to it with slightly underexposed subjects, and our highlights are again walking that fine line between blown out and looking right. So starting off, just adjusting those shadows to where we want them to be, finding that right contrast. We already have our tone curve here, which I think I'm going to reset to that medium contrast. These mid-tones were a little more than I wanted. I think I will add a little color in the highlights here. Why are there so many city noises today? And then in our midtones, actually let's come to our shadows first. We're gonna make this one kind of earthy. Bring that luminance down a little bit. And finishing out with those midtones. Maybe a little orangish in here. And then when you are color grading, really spending the time to adjust your luminance values is going to give you a lot of room to modify how that tone looks in those color ranges. So when we come into particularly our rocks here, in the background and these two up front, when we're adjusting that luminance, we're really changing a lot of the tones throughout this image. And we could do so as well if we come back up to our highlights, really finding that balance between blown out and just right highlights, which again, a lot of that does start off in camera. So that is going to be really important to see how the image looks raw right here. And that is how we are exposing it in camera to develop it into something else later that is going to save all of those highlights and all of that detail. We'll come to one more image here. This one, again, another very important photo. This was right after an engagement. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reset the shadows, but I still have the tone curve and our lens corrections on here. So when we're looking at this photo, this one was once again taken right on the borderline of blowing out those highlights. So using those zebras on the camera to find that delicate balance between blown out and usable image, but when we do so, we find that our darker subjects are kindly underexposed. So what we're going to do, start off just by bringing those shadows up to where we want them to be. Going to find a bit more of a natural skin tone in our white balance. What I like to do is usually come too blue, too cold, too warm, and then just kind of walk that balance back and forth to see where it falls and looks just right. And then once I've got those shadows about where I want them, we can further adjust highlights if we need to. And that already, just with minimal editing, no color grading, no custom tone curve corrections, just putting a very basic medium contrast curve on, we're already able to see a really clear definition between our subject and our background, being able to shoot in those very bright highlights and keep all of that detail within our subject. If this video has been helpful for you guys, definitely appreciate the support on the video. I hope to be able to continue to make more videos helping you guys learn some new things on your photography journey. There are so many city noises outside. I have never filmed before like 1 o'clock in the morning. What is going on?